Good day or good evening, however that applies to you. Today we're going to take a trip to the Smithsonian Institute's Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. We'll take a tour through the Hall of Human Origins and visit some ancient precursors to modern humans that have been discovered in recent years, some of whom you may recognize. To get to the hall, we pass through a sort of time tunnel that transports us back a few million years. A graph on the wall indicates the primary stages of development humans went through as they progressed first in Africa and then in the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and beyond. The Smithsonian starts the line of humanity beginning at 6 million years ago with the hallmark that separates humans from all other mammals. We are bipedal. We walk on two legs. No other mammal does that. Other primates can manage to stand upright for a short duration, but they prefer walking and especially running on all fours. Some paleontologists draw the line between man and ape, regarding the use of stone tools as a line of demarcation, and prefer to regard mankind as beginning with our genus Homo, and for them, man departed from the apes around 2.5 million years ago, beginning with Homo habilis. Control of fire was the next leap forward in technology, and that began possibly as early as 1.5 million years ago. The earliest hearths are at least 790,000 years old. This was a huge benefit, giving them the ability to cook their meat, stave off wild animals, and have warmth at night. Our brains began to get bigger at around 500,000 years ago. By 250,000 years ago, we began to communicate with symbols. The length of time spent in childhood increased, beginning around 160,000 years ago, and by 10,500 years ago, we began to grow crops in small communities and raise domesticated animals. This advance allowed for cities where culture could develop and for the specialization of labor, which would bring us to the first cities that began in Turkey and Syria, where cereal grains could be cultivated, and finally to Mesopotamia, where our biblical and historical journey truly begins. If we look on the floor near the entrance to the hall, we can see a cast of human footprints dated to 3.6 million years ago, discovered by paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey in 1976 in Tanzania. These are the footprints of a small family of Australopithecines who are making their journey in somewhat precarious circumstances. Ash from a nearby volcanic eruption, mixed with rain, was falling on our trio of travelers as they slogged their way through the mix of mud and volcanic ash that covered the soggy ground. Two adults, perhaps a male and female, are making their way, one stepping in the footprints of the leader with a child beside. You can see two adult footprints together, one walking in the footprints of the other. What is notable is the wide spacing between the big toe and the little toes that can be seen here. Although they were obviously bipedal, their feet were still adapted to life in the trees where they could sleep at night in relative safety from leopards and other wild animals that patrolled the grasslands in search of tasty humans to add to their diet. The child walking beside shows the same footprint pattern as the adults, a wide space between the big toe and the little toes. Well, this offers definitive proof of a bipedal species that existed unlike modern humans today. This is a model of the famous Lucy as she might have looked in the prime of her life, 3.3 million years ago, standing about 3.5 feet tall, although males of her species stood about 5 feet tall. Here are a couple of exhibits to show the difference between a Homo sapiens foot and one belonging to an Australopithecine. And this shows the difference between the foot of a modern human and the one belonging to a chimpanzee. This graph depicts the amount of oxygen isotopes in deep-sea forams taken from core examples extracted from the ocean floor. The length of the core sample equates to time of deposition, and the graph shows a pattern of 10 million years of climate variation with warm and cold cycles depicted. We can see the rate of climate change was relatively slow for millions of years. During this time, the amount of change occurring in humans and their precursors was slight. By contrast, in the last 2 million years, changes in climate were more frequent, with large swings between hot and cold occurring, and human adaptation followed suit, exhibited by larger changes in morphology and behavior. Now, it's not exactly that the climate changed and we responded in kind. It has more to do with the changes in human behavior patterns that were heavily influenced by climate change, because it was only within this time frame that we began chasing animals for food. During the ice ages, shown here, animal herds remained in the southern regions. But during the interglacial periods, animal herds would migrate north, following the advancing grasslands, with their human predators in tow, picking off the slower and weaker animals trailing the migrating herds. Human remains have been found as far north as Siberia in their constant search for food. This exhibit displays 2.5 million years of human skull casts, beginning with an Australopithecus africanus. Its brain case is about the size of a grapefruit, and the slope of the face angles sharply forward, similar to gorillas. The Paranthropus boisei model shows the sagittal crest at the top of the skull, needed to attach large masseter muscles. On this Homo erectus cast, you can see the pronounced brow ridge, and it is believed that a massive brow ridge helped to dissipate the pressures from grinding their large molars to crush seeds and nuts and grass into something they could digest. A large passageway in the skull formation accommodates the large muscles that are attached to a substantial lower jaw. As we move to a modern human, the skull is expanded to accommodate a larger brain. The face is now aligned vertically from a more modest brow ridge, and the passageway for the muscles used for chewing are smaller now, reduced from adapting to tens of thousands of years of eating softer fruits and vegetables and meat. If we had turned to the left when we came through the time tunnel, we would have come to our quite extended family tree. You may recognize Uncle Fritz on one of the lower limbs. Not your uncle, of course, but mine. If we start at the base of the tree, or bush, as paleoanthropologist Richard Leakey would call it, we encounter early forerunners we have come to know as Ardipithecus, who lived in East Africa. Ardipithecus cadaba is the oldest, dated to as early as 5.8 million years ago. Ardipithecus ramidus was first reported in 1994. In 2009, scientists announced a partial skeleton affectionately known as Ardi. The foot bones in this particular skeleton indicate a divergent large toe combined with a rigid foot. It's not clear what that means concerning bipedal behavior. The pelvis is said to show adaptations that combine tree climbing and bipedal activity. The discoverers argue that the Ardi skeleton reflects a human African ape common ancestor, although the Smithsonian puts Ardi in the human category from his entry after 6 million years ago. Ardi's fossils were found amidst faunal remains, indicating he lived in a wooded environment. The Paranthropus group lived between about 2.3 million years and 1.2 million years ago, whereupon they reached an evolutionary dead end. Being strictly vegetarian with large guts and short legs, they never left Africa. By contrast, the Australopithecines living during the same time frame and in the same area of East Africa added meat to their diet, and through adaptation streamlined their body plan with longer legs suitable for chasing animals. It was from this group, it is believed, that Homo habilis descended, the first in the genus Homo. We have no way of knowing how many branches may have set off to find their way in the world without success. Nevertheless, researchers commonly trace our own lineage from habilis to erectus to heidelbergensis, and then to our own species, Homo sapiens, beginning 200,000 years ago. What many find interesting is that if you journeyed back in time 150,000 years ago, there were 4 different species of humans, all living on the earth, all at the same time. Some believe erectus may have lived until nearly 70,000 years ago. The Neanderthals lived until 30 to 35,000 years ago, and the 3-foot-tall hobbits living on the island of Flores survived until about 17,000 years ago. And of course, today, we're the only remaining human species. This graph shows the different species of humans, when they lived, and how long each species endured. For example, Homo erectus remained on Earth about 1 million years, so we still have 800,000 more years to go if we want to catch up. Perhaps you've heard some people say, "I can't believe we came from monkeys." If you know people like that, please tell them they're right. Man did not come from monkeys, and the reverse is true. Monkeys did not come from man. We are all survivors, branches off of a family tree that has existed for 3 billion years. Monkeys are only one particular branch, and the branch point where they diverged is about 25 million years ago. This graph shows genetic similarity between humans and other selected species. All humans are separated genetically by only 1/10 of 1%. So only one base pair of nucleotides in 1,000 separates you from being Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie. The DNA of chimpanzees, who branched off 6 million years ago, differs from human DNA by 1.2%, while gorillas, who split off 2 million years earlier, differ from humans by a slightly greater amount. Their DNA is 98.4% similar. At the other end of the spectrum, mice differ by about 15%, chickens have a 75% similarity in DNA, and even a banana tree shows a genetic similarity of about 60%. In other words, all of life is connected by common ancestry, and the differences in DNA are explained by the time of divergence. Also, certain genes are conserved through time, or life itself wouldn't be possible. Turning our attention to our own immediate forerunners, we come to this fellow who I think you will admit doesn't look very human at all, and whether he is or isn't is open to debate. Living just earlier than 6 million years ago, Sahelanthropus tchadensis is still primarily in the ape category, yet an early member of the human family tree. Although Australopithecus afarensis usually is considered in the direct line leading to modern humans, Africanus, pictured here, does get a few votes. Their feet were longer than forerunners, and arches developed for better support of their bodies. Hands became more adept at carrying and handling foods and tools. While the late Australopithecines were similar to later humans, anatomically below the neck, their heads were significantly different from ours in several key features. Their adult brain size was about 1/3 that of members of our own species. The widest part of the skull of these early humans was below the brain case. For modern humans, it is usually in the temple region. They had comparatively big molar teeth and thick enamel. By comparison, their front teeth were small. They had large jaws and powerful jaw muscles. Paranthropus boisei males weighed about 110 pounds and stood about 4.5 feet tall. They had a skull and teeth highly specialized for heavy chewing. The back molars were large, with an area over twice as great as modern humans, and enormous cheek teeth averaged 4 times the size. The species is sometimes referred to as nutcracker man because it has the biggest cheek teeth and the thickest enamel of any other human species. The Paranthropus group lived in the same general locale and during the same time frame as the Australopithecines, but reached an evolutionary dead end. Eating roots and tubers and grass doesn't require the skills needed to hunt animals for food. Small family groups with little or no verbal communication would be sufficient for these vegetarians. For the hunters, though, larger groups would be necessary to track and trap wild animals. Some communication would be useful. Perhaps also members of the Paranthropus group were menu items for the meeting Australopithecines. Whatever the reason, it is from the Australopithecines that the genus Homo descended. The earliest use of stone tool making dates to 2.6 million years ago with Homo habilis, also called handyman. Evidence of this was found in the Middle Awash Valley in Ethiopia, where sharp flakes and stone cores were discovered. These cores exhibit overlapping scars where they were struck to produce flakes that were used for various purposes, such as scraping meat from animal bones. Homo erectus survived longer than any other human species, over 1 million years, from about 1.9 million years to 140 million years ago. Early African Homo erectus fossils are the oldest known early humans to have possessed modern, human-like body proportions, with relatively longer legs and shorter arms. These features are considered to be adaptations to a life spent on the ground, indicating the loss of earlier tree climbing ability, with the added capability to walk and possibly run long distances. The most complete fossil individual of this species is known as the Turkana boy, a well-preserved skeleton dated to around 1.6 million years. Microscopic study of the teeth indicates he grew up quickly at a growth rate similar to that of great apes. There is fossil evidence that Homo erectus cared for old and weak individuals. Their appearance in the fossil record is often associated with the earliest hand axes, the first major innovation in stone tool technology. Generally considered to have been the first species to have ventured beyond Africa, Homo erectus is a highly variable species that spread over 2 continents. Homo heidelbergensis is generally considered to be intermediate between erectus and modern humans living from 700,000 years ago to about 200,000 years ago. This early human had a very large brow ridge, a larger brain case, and flatter face than older early human species. Heidelbergensis was the first human species to live in colder climates. Their short, wide bodies are considered to be an adaptation to conserve body heat. They lived at the time of the oldest definite control of fire and use of wooden spears, and was the very first early human species known to routinely hunt large animals. This early human also broke new ground. It was the first species to build shelters, creating simple family dwellings from wood and rock. Neanderthals lived from about 200,000 years ago, surviving to about 28,000 years ago. Neanderthals are our closest extinct human relative. Some defining features of their skulls include the large middle part of the face, angled cheekbones, and a huge nose for humidifying and warming cold, dry air. Their bodies were shorter and stockier than ours, another adaptation to living in cold environments. But their brains were just about as large as ours and often larger, proportional to their heavier bodies. Males averaged 5 feet 5 inches in height, while females averaged 5 feet 1 inch. While the tall, lean bodies of earlier human species like Homo erectus were adapted to tropical temperatures, the short, stocky bodies of Neanderthals were adapted to winter climates, with thick, shorter lower arm and leg bones. making up a very strong and compact body. Neanderthals were more heavily built than modern humans and were more efficient at conserving body heat, allowing them to withstand living in cold climates. Neanderthals made and used a diverse set of sophisticated stone and bone tools. They controlled fire, lived in shelters, made and wore clothing, were skilled hunters of large animals, and also ate plant foods and occasionally made symbolic or ornamental objects. There is evidence that Neanderthals deliberately buried their dead and occasionally even marked their graves with offerings, such as flowers. No other primates and no earlier humans had ever practiced this sophisticated and symbolic behavior. DNA has been recovered from more than a dozen Neanderthal fossils, all from Europe. When Neanderthal DNA was first recovered and only a small portion had been described, it was thought that no gene flow or mating had occurred between them and our own species. When a complete DNA sequence had finally been obtained only a few years ago, it was discovered that from 2 to 4% of the genes from those of us who are of European and Asian descent are common to both species, indicating that some contact occurred in the areas where Neanderthals were prevalent and where some of our own species had ventured. The romantics among us might prefer to believe that a sort of love-in took place between them and us, but a more likely scenario from what we know of human tendencies is that hunting parties of Homo sapiens would encounter settlements of Neanderthals, eliminate the males and appropriate the females and perhaps the young children, thereby adding Neanderthal genes through procreation to their own genetic makeup. Whatever happened, we do know that peoples today who are native to Europe and Asia can boast about their Neanderthal heritage. This brings us to a species with which we are more familiar, Homo sapiens, who began about 200,000 years ago and today are the only surviving human species on Earth. Beginning in Africa as an offshoot of Homo heidelbergensis, Homo sapiens slowly began to populate the entire globe. During a time of dramatic climate change 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began in Africa. Like other early humans living at this time, they gathered and hunted food and developed behaviors that helped them respond to the challenges of survival in unstable environments. Anatomically, modern humans can generally be characterized by the lighter build of their skeletons compared to earlier humans. Modern humans have very large brains which vary in size from population to population and between males and females, but the average size is approximately 1,300 cubic centimeters. Housing this big brain involved the reorganization of the skull into what is thought of as modern, a thin-walled, high-vaulted skull with a flat and near vertical forehead. Modern human faces also show reduced brow ridges. Jaws are also less prominent, with smaller teeth. Although earlier waves of humans ventured north in pursuit of animal herds during the warm interglacial periods, the last wave from one branch is dated to 60,000 years ago. The out-of-Africa theory is the most widely accepted model of the geographic origin and early migration of anatomically modern humans. The theory was speculative until the 1980s, when it was corroborated by a study of present-day mitochondrial DNA, combined with evidence based on physical anthropology of archaic specimens. Genetic studies and fossil evidence show that archaic Homo sapiens evolved to anatomically modern humans solely in Africa. Over time, these human species replaced earlier human populations of Neanderthals and Homo erectus. The date of the earliest successful migration out of Africa has generally been placed at 60,000 years, as suggested by genetics, although earlier migrations out of the continent may have taken place as early as 125,000 years ago. In 1987, a worldwide survey of human mitochondrial DNA was published. The main point was that all mitochondrial DNAs stem from one woman, and that she probably lived around 200,000 years ago in East Africa. When the media picked up the story that they had found the mitochondrial Eve, or African Eve, the story became a sensation. Unlike nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA comes only from the mother, and all living humans are thought to be derived initially from a single woman. Mitochondrial DNA is transferred from mother to daughter, generation after generation. In the field of human genetics, the name mitochondrial Eve refers to the matrilineal most recent common ancestor of all currently living anatomically modern humans. This is the most recent woman from whom all living humans today are descended on their mother's side, and through the mothers of those mothers, and so on, going back until all lines converge on one person, ancestral to all. Mitochondrial Eve was not the only living human female living at that time. However, her female contemporaries did not produce a direct, unbroken female line to any woman living today. Mitochondrial Eve lived later than Homo heidelbergensis and the emergence of the Neanderthals, but earlier than the out-of-Africa migration. On the male side, we have a counterpart dubbed Y chromosome Adam. All men living today would theoretically have a Y chromosome descended from one man to whom all men would be related. According to new research reported in the European Journal of Human Genetics, our most recent common ancestor, the so-called Y chromosomal Adam, lived on the Earth over 208,000 years ago. Even though it is possible both of our ultimate parents could have lived during the same time frame in Africa, the idea they might have known each other romantically is highly problematical. More recent studies from Neanderthals and from human specimens found in a Denisova cave in Siberia have given our understanding of our ancient past an unexpected turn. They indicate that modern humans did not completely replace other human species as had once been believed. Instead, there was some interbreeding taking place between different human species. This idea has become known as replacement hybridization, or leaky replacement, or mostly out of Africa. Whole genome sequencing of African hunter-gatherers suggests that modern humans in Africa may have bred with archaic populations that were still in residence at the time. So although most of the modern human genome originated in Africa, some genomic regions possess older lineages. In other words, there appears to be overlap among human species instead of a nice, neat, straight line from erectus to heidelbergensis to Homo sapiens, as we see on most charts of human lineage. Ancestry appears to be a little more messy than what has been popularly believed, according to the most recent studies. Oh, and don't forget to hug your own little Homo sapiens tonight. After all, they have come a long way. In the next episode, we'll begin to tackle Genesis 2 and see where biblical Adam fits in the anthropological picture. We will see that the Genesis narrative is quite compatible with all we have discussed up until now and with the history of the ancient Near East, beginning about 7,000 years ago. And thank you for watching.